Some monuments are built to be seen. A few were built to be understood. And this one has kept its secret for 5,000 years. You already know what it looks like. A ring of impossible stones standing alone on an empty English plain. Stonehenge, perhaps the most famous ancient monument on Earth. Millions of people have stood before it. They photograph the giant stones. They walk the rope line. They read the small sign. And then they leave, believing they have seen it. But almost none of them know the strangest thing about this place. Stonehenge is not where it began. The stones at its heart were not born on that plain. Some were dragged from mountains 150 miles away. And one of them, the great stone at the very center, came from the far end of Britain, 500 miles to the north. Think about that. 5,000 years ago, with no wheel, no metal tools, and no written language, someone moved a 6-ton slab of rock across an entire country, on purpose, to place it here. We call the builders primitive. They moved mountains. So sit with 3 questions. How did people with nothing but stone and antler raise blocks heavier than a truck and fit them together with the precision of a carpenter? Why would anyone tear down a finished stone circle in one place and drag it across a nation to rebuild it somewhere else? And after 5,000 years and every tool modern science can offer, why can we still not say for certain what Stonehenge was even for? By the end of this video, you will see how an entire monument was carried across Britain, stone by stone. Why the greatest mystery of Stonehenge was never the stones, but the people who moved them. And why the most studied ancient site on Earth is still keeping its biggest secret. This is the story of the monument that shouldn't exist. Chapter 1. The stones that shouldn't move. To understand the mystery, start with the impossible part, the stones themselves. Walk up to Stonehenge, and the first thing that breaks your sense of scale is the size. The largest stones, the ones that form the great arches, are called sarcens. They stand over 20 feet tall. They weigh as much as 25 tons, the weight of 4 adult elephants in a single block. Now remember when this was built, around 4,500 years ago. There was no iron, no bronze for tools, no wheel anywhere in Britain, no horse to pull a load. The people who raised these stones had antler picks, stone hammers, rope twisted from plants, and their own hands. And yet, they did something that still stops engineers cold. They did not just stand the stones up. They capped them. On top of each pair of standing stones, they lifted a third stone and laid it flat across the top, forming a bridge in the air, a structure we call a trilithon. Look closely at how they joined them, and it gets stranger. These were people with no written plans and no metal. But to lock the top stones in place, they carved a bump on each standing stone and a matching hollow underneath the stone above. A joint borrowed from woodworking. Stone shaped to click together like timber. On the outer ring, they even curved the top stones so they would meet edge to edge in a smooth, level circle, following the sweep of the ring. This is not rough stacking. This is engineering. And they did it by eye. No compass, no level, no written measurement of any kind. Just rope, stakes, sight lines, and a feel for stone and sky that we are still trying to reconstruct today. So how did they lift 25 tons with no machines? We still argue about the details. The leading picture is this. Teams of hundreds hauled each stone across the landscape on massive timber sledges dragged over rails of greased logs. To stand a sarsen upright, they dug a deep pit with one sloping side, levered the base down into it, and pulled the top with ropes until the stones swung upright and dropped into place. To raise the capstones 10 feet into the air, they likely built platforms of timber, lifting the stone a hair at a time, packing wood beneath it, again and again and again, until it reached the top. Every step was slow, every step was dangerous, and every step was done by people we still call primitive. And this was not the work of a single season. The building of Stonehenge across all its stages stretched over 1,500 years, longer than the entire history of the Roman Empire. Generations were born, grew old, and died in the shadow of a monument that was never quite finished. A grandfather might haul a stone that only his grandchildren would live to see raised. This was not a building project. It was an inheritance, passed down the centuries like a promise. But this is where it stops being an engineering feat and becomes a genuine mystery. The hardest stones to move were not the giant sarcens. The sarcens came from barely 20 miles away. The real puzzle is a set of smaller stones hidden inside the circle. Because those stones did not travel 20 miles. They came from another country, and to follow them, we have to leave the plain and travel west into the mountains of Wales. Chapter 2. The Monument That Was Moved. Inside the great ring of sarcens stands a second, smaller circle. Stones of a different color, a different rock entirely. They are called the bluestones, and each one weighs 2 to 4 tons. For a long time, one fact about them was simply accepted as impossible, but true. The bluestones do not belong to southern England at all. They come from the Preseli Hills in West Wales, 150 miles away. Let that settle. Someone quarried dozens of multi-ton stones out of the mountains of Wales, and then moved them, somehow, 150 miles, across rivers and valleys and forest, all the way to Salisbury Plain. For years, the only question was how? By sea? By river? By sledge? Over land? But recently, archaeologists asked a different question. Not how the stones were moved, but whether they had already been standing somewhere else first. In the Preseli Hills, at a place called Wan Mon, they found the answer waiting in the ground. Empty holes. The sockets where standing stones had once been set and then pulled back out. And when they mapped those holes, the shape was unmistakable. A stone circle, 110 meters across, the exact same diameter as the very first circle raised at Stonehenge. The dates matched. The stone type matched. Even the odd cross-section of one empty Welsh socket matched a blue stone still standing at Stonehenge today, like a key fitting its lock. The conclusion was staggering. Stonehenge did not simply borrow a few stones from Wales. Stonehenge, in part, once was a Welsh monument. A stone circle first raised in the mountains of Wales around 5,500 years ago, then, generations later, taken apart and hauled 150 miles east to be built again on a new plain. Why would anyone do that? The best answer we have is a haunting one. Around that same time, the people of that Welsh region seem to fade from the record. Their fields fall quiet. Their monuments go dark. It looks like an entire community pulled up its roots and moved east. And when they left, they did not abandon their sacred place. They took it with them. They carried their circle, their stones, their ancestors, and their gods, and they rebuilt their whole world in a new land. Seen this way, Stonehenge is not only a temple, it is a monument to migration, to memory, to a people who refused to leave their identity in the ground behind them. And there is a strange echo to all of this. 800 years ago, long before any archaeologist put a spade in the ground, a medieval writer set down a legend about Stonehenge. He wrote that the stones had been brought to Salisbury Plain from far away in the west, carried by the wizard Merlin, who took a great stone circle called the Giant's Dance and raised it again in England. For centuries, it was dismissed as pure fairy tale. And then archaeologists dug up Wan Mon in the west and found the empty circle those stones had come from. The legend had the direction right. It had the idea of a circle, moved and rebuilt, right. It was wrong only about the magic. And then, in the summer of 2024, the story grew stranger still. Scientists tested the single most important stone in the entire monument, the altar stone, the great slab lying flat at the very heart of Stonehenge. They expected it to come from Wales. It did not come from Wales. The chemical fingerprint of that 6-ton stone matched bedrock from the very top of Britain, the far northeast of Scotland, almost 500 miles away. 500 miles. No roads, no wheels, no metal. A 6-ton stone moved nearly the entire length of Britain, most likely floated the long way round by sea. It means that 5,000 years ago, the peoples of this island, from Scotland to Wales to England, were linked in ways we are only starting to imagine. Stonehenge was not the work of one small tribe on one lonely plain. It may have been a monument for an entire nation, which raises the deepest question of all. What was so important, so sacred, that people would drag the stones of a whole island into a single field, to build a thing whose true purpose we still cannot prove? Chapter 3. The purpose we cannot prove. Here is the uncomfortable truth about the most famous monument on Earth. We do not know what it was for, not for certain. The builders left no writing, no records, no names. Everything we believe about the purpose of Stonehenge, we have to read from the stones, the soil, and the dead. And the dead tell us the first part. Stonehenge is a graveyard. In and around the monument, archaeologists have recovered the cremated remains of at least 150 people, laid here across its earliest centuries. It is one of the largest Neolithic cemeteries ever found in Britain. So, for at least part of its life, this was a place of the dead. A ring of ash and bone wrapped in standing stone. But the dead may not be the whole story. Some of the bluestones, the very stones carried all the way from Wales, may have been prized for another reason entirely. There is a theory that people believed these stones could heal. Among the bodies buried near Stonehenge are people who show signs of serious injury and disease, and some who grew up far from this plain. It has led archaeologists to wonder whether Stonehenge was also a place of pilgrimage, a prehistoric site of healing, where the sick and the desperate traveled across the land, hoping that whatever power lived in these stones might make them whole again. But it was also a place built to watch the sky. Stand at the center on the morning of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, and the rising sun breaks directly over a single outlying stone known as the heel stone, and pours straight down the avenue into the heart of the circle. 6 months later, on the shortest day of the year, the midwinter sun sets along that very same line in the opposite direction. This is not chance. The whole monument is aligned to the two turning points of the year, the sun at its highest and the sun at its lowest. Whatever else it was, Stonehenge was a machine for marking time, a calendar cut from stone, tracking the death and the rebirth of the year. And there is a third clue, 1.5 miles away, a place called Durrington Walls. There, archaeologists uncovered the traces of a huge settlement, houses, hearths, and mountains of animal bone. People came here in enormous numbers, above all in the depth of midwinter, and they feasted. The pattern hints that Stonehenge was never a lonely temple tended by a handful of priests. It was the still heart of a vast gathering, a place where scattered communities crossed the land to come together at the turning of the year, to build, to bury, to feast, and to belong. And the two places may have been two halves of one idea. Durrington was a place of timber and of the living. Its wooden circles faced the midwinter sunrise and the promise of returning light. Stonehenge was a place of stone and of the dead. Its great arches faced the midwinter sunset and the dying of the year. One built in wood for the world of the living, one built in stone for the world of the ancestors, joined by the river that ran between them and by a road that may have carried the dead from one to the other. If that is right, then Stonehenge was never meant to stand alone at all. It was one half of the largest sacred landscape in all of prehistoric Europe. So which was it? A tomb, a temple, a calendar, a meeting place for a divided people? The honest answer is that it was most likely all of them at once, and that we may never fully pull them apart. Because the one thing the builders never left us was the reason. They spoke to us in stone. And on the question of why, the stone stays silent. Chapter 4. The Question in the Stones. We like to imagine that we have solved the ancient world, that with radar and radiocarbon and DNA, the old mysteries have all been cracked and only the footnotes remain. Stonehenge is proof that this is not true. It is the most studied prehistoric monument on the planet. It has been measured, scanned, dug, and argued over for more than 300 years. And it still refuses to fully explain itself. We now know its stones were dragged from Wales and from Scotland. We do not truly know how. We know it was a graveyard and a calendar and a gathering place. We do not know which came first or which mattered most. We know a whole community may have carried it across the country. We do not know exactly why they could not leave it behind. And maybe that is the real lesson. Standing out there on Salisbury Plain, we tend to measure ancient people by what they did not have. No wheel, no metal, no writing. And then we turn and look at what they built, and the measure falls apart in our hands. Because it took people with none of those things to do something that we, with all of ours, still cannot fully explain. To move mountains by hand. To carry a monument across a nation. To line a ring of stone up with the sun so exactly that it still catches the solstice, 5,000 years on, precisely as they meant it to. So here is the question the stones leave you holding. If a people we call primitive could reach across an entire island and raise something this precise, this deliberate, this lasting, what else have we underestimated about the world before writing? How many other quiet fields and ordinary hills are holding a story this large only because no one has thought to look? The builders of Stonehenge never wrote their names. They never explained themselves. They simply left the stones standing exactly where they meant them to stand. And after 5,000 years, the stones are still asking the question. We are the ones who cannot answer.